I always thought my real life would start later. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Just, later. After something happened. After something changed. After I became more ready, more confident, more certain. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment as if life was an appointment that could be rescheduled indefinitely. And for a long time, that excuse worked. I didn't feel lost. I felt paused. That's the dangerous part about waiting. It feels responsible. It feels patient. It feels like you're avoiding mistakes instead of avoiding life. I remember being younger and believing that adults knew when they were living their real life. That there was a moment when everything clicked into place, when choices stopped feeling temporary and started feeling permanent in a good way. That moment never came. Instead, I built a life that was functional but provisional. Jobs that paid the bills but didn't demand commitment. Relationships that were comfortable but undefined. Dreams that stayed vague enough to avoid disappointment. Everything was for now. I told myself I was being flexible. Open. Smart enough not to lock myself into the wrong future. What I was actually doing was keeping every door half open so I wouldn't have to walk through any of them. Years passed like that. Not loudly. Not painfully. Quietly. I marked time by external events, birthdays, holidays, promotions that belonged to other people. Inside, nothing moved forward. I was always preparing, never arriving. People asked me where I saw myself in 5 years. I laughed it off. Said I liked to see where life took me. They called me spontaneous. I wasn't spontaneous. I was afraid of choosing wrong. Every decision felt final in a way I wasn't ready for. So I avoided decisions altogether. I let circumstances decide for me. I accepted what showed up instead of reaching for what I wanted, because reaching meant risking failure. And failure terrified me less than certainty. Certainty meant accountability. There were moments when I felt a sharp urge to change something. To quit. To leave. To speak up. To begin. Those moments came unexpectedly, like sudden clarity. I ignored them. I told myself urgency was impulsive. That wise people move slowly. That nothing good comes from rushing. I didn't realize that life doesn't wait for your confidence to catch up. The first real crack appeared one evening when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had been excited about the future. Not anxious. Not hopeful in a vague way. Excited. I sat there trying to think of something, anything that made me feel that pull forward. My mind stayed blank. That scared me. I told myself it was just a phase. Burnout. Stress. Adult realism replacing youthful fantasy. That's another lie waiting makes you good at telling. I started noticing how often I said someday. Someday I'll travel. Someday I'll change careers. Someday I'll live somewhere that feels like home. Someday I'll feel like myself again. Someday became my most used word. But someday isn't a plan. It's a postponement. And postponement has a cost. I felt it most in quiet moments. Waiting in lines. Sitting on trains. Lying awake at night. There was a low-grade sadness I couldn't explain, not strong enough to call depression, not clear enough to act on. Just a sense of absence. As if I had skipped an important step and everything after it felt slightly misaligned. I watched other people commit to things, relationships, careers, places. Some of them were happy. Some weren't. But they were inside their lives. Engaged. Present. Even when things went wrong, they were at least living the consequences of their own choices. I envied that more than success. I told myself I was being cautious. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't waiting for the right life. I was waiting to feel worthy of it. And that feeling never arrived on its own. The moment that broke me wasn't dramatic. No crisis. no loss. Just a sentence spoken casually by someone younger than me. I feel like I'm running out of time, they said, laughing. I smiled automatically. And then it hit me. I wasn't afraid of running out of time. I was afraid that my time had already been spent on waiting. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked myself an honest question. What if this is it? What if there is no later version of my life waiting to begin? What if this cautious, half-lived existence is the only one I get? The thought didn't cause panic. It caused grief. Grief for all the choices I had postponed until they quietly expired. For all the versions of myself that never got a chance to exist because I kept them in storage, waiting for approval. I understood then that waiting had become my identity. And identities, once recognized, don't dissolve gently. They demand confrontation. Once you notice how much time you've lost, it becomes impossible to pretend you're still waiting on purpose. That question, what if this is it, stayed with me longer than I expected. It followed me into ordinary days, slipped into conversations, hovered at the edge of every decision I avoided making. I tried to push it away, but it had already settled somewhere deep. I began to see my life differently. Not as unfinished, but as overprepared. I had spent years gathering tools for a future that never arrived. Skills I never used fully. Emotions I kept contained. Opinions I softened so much they disappeared. I had been living like a guest in my own existence, careful not to leave marks. And suddenly, that carefulness felt obscene. I told myself I would change. That realization would be enough. That awareness alone would push me forward. It didn't. Knowing you've wasted time doesn't automatically teach you how to use what's left. I tried to fix everything at once. That's what panic disguises itself as urgency with no direction. I made lists. Big ones. Career shifts. Moves. Personal reinventions, entire identities sketched out like concepts for someone else. I didn't act on most of them. Because underneath the rush was the same fear, choosing wrong, but faster this time. I watched people talk about regret as if it only belongs to the elderly. As if youth automatically protects you from it. But regret doesn't wait for age. It waits for awareness. And awareness had finally caught up with me. I became obsessed with time. Not in a productive way. In a measuring way. I calculated how many years I'd spent not yet ready. How many chances I'd deferred. How many versions of my life had quietly closed due to inactivity. The numbers were cruel. I tried to bargain with myself. Told myself I still had plenty of years left. That people reinvent themselves all the time. That it wasn't too late. All of that was technically true. What scared me wasn't lateness. It was inertia. I realized that waiting had rewired me. I didn't just postpone decisions, I had lost confidence in my ability to make them. Every option felt heavier now, burdened with the pressure of making up for lost time. That pressure was paralyzing. The irony was painful. I had waited so long to avoid regret that I had created the very thing I feared. There were moments when I almost slipped back into my old mindset. Telling myself I needed one more sign. One more confirmation. One more push from the outside. But something had changed. I could no longer pretend that passivity was neutral. One night, lying awake, I thought about all the times I had said I'm just waiting for things to settle. Waiting for money. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for confidence. Life never settles. It moves. With or without you. That realization didn't motivate me. It cornered me. I understood that I was approaching a different kind of point of no return. Not a dramatic deadline, a psychological one. A moment after which the story I told myself would harden into identity forever. I'm just someone who waits. That sentence terrified me more than failure ever had. So I did something small. Not impressive. Not cinematic. I made a decision that couldn't be undone easily. I committed to something public. Something that would be noticed if I abandoned it. I didn't tell anyone it was symbolic, but it was. It was my way of forcing myself out of the waiting room. The moment I did it, panic hit. Immediate, physical panic. My chest tightened. My mind raced ahead, imagining regret, embarrassment, exposure. Every instinct screamed that I had made a mistake. That reaction told me everything. If it felt that threatening, it mattered. The days that followed were uncomfortable. I questioned myself constantly. Wondered if I was pretending to change instead of actually changing. Wondered if this was just another temporary attempt before retreat. But something subtle happened alongside the fear. Time started moving again. Not faster. Not better. Just forward. My days had texture. My decisions had consequences. Even the discomfort felt alive in a way my careful numbness never had. I still felt grief for the years I had lost. That didn't disappear. It softened slightly, became less sharp. I stopped using it as a reason to freeze and started using it as information. This is what waiting costs. And this is what movement demands. I began to see how many people around me were still waiting too. Waiting for approval. For confidence. For permission. We don't call it fear, we call it being realistic. But realism without agency is just resignation. I wasn't cured of my hesitation. I wasn't suddenly brave. I still doubted myself daily. But I was no longer invisible to my own life. I had crossed a quiet threshold. From postponing regret, to risking it. And that terrified me. Because once you start living deliberately, you lose the comfort of pretending you didn't know better. Once I stopped waiting, I expected relief. That's what people promise you, that action cures regret, that movement dissolves fear, that choosing anything is better than standing still. That wasn't my experience. What I felt instead was exposure. When you stop waiting, there's nothing left to hide behind. No future version of yourself to blame. No imagined timing that explains why your life hasn't begun yet. You are suddenly, undeniably present. And presence is demanding. I started noticing how tired I was. Not physically, existentially. Years of postponement had drained something from me that urgency couldn't immediately restore. I had momentum now, but not energy. Direction, but not confidence. I had underestimated how deeply waiting had shaped me. It wasn't just a habit. It was a worldview. I had built my identity around potential rather than reality. Around what I could be instead of what I was. Letting go of that meant grieving not just lost time, but lost excuses. Because as long as I was waiting, my failures were theoretical. My mistakes hadn't happened yet. My disappointments were hypothetical. Now they were possible. Now they were mine. There were days when I wondered if I had made things worse. When I longed for the numb safety of my old life. When the weight of making the most of it felt unbearable. I had waited so long that every remaining year felt precious in a way that was almost cruel. I realized something uncomfortable then. You don't just mourn the years you lose. You mourn the illusion that you had infinite time. That illusion had protected me for decades. It allowed me to delay, to soften decisions, to tell myself there was no rush. Letting it go felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. Because time, once seen clearly, cannot be unseen. I began to understand that regret isn't loud because it's angry. It's loud because it finally has your attention. Mine spoke in questions. Why did I believe I needed permission to live? Why did I trust fear more than desire? Why did I treat certainty as arrogance instead of self-respect? The answers weren't kind. I had learned early that wanting too much was dangerous. That expectation invited disappointment. That safety came from minimizing yourself until nothing could be taken away. I had mistaken self-protection for wisdom. But wisdom doesn't shrink you. It aligns you. The final shift didn't come with a breakthrough or a dramatic choice. It came one quiet morning when I realized I was no longer asking when my real life would begin. It had already begun. Not in the way I once imagined, not with clarity or confidence or excitement, but with responsibility. Responsibility for how I spend my attention. Responsibility for what I tolerate. Responsibility for choosing, even when the outcome is uncertain. I stopped trying to catch up. That mindset only deepened the wound. You can't outpace time. You can only inhabit it. I allowed myself to live smaller than my fantasies, but truer than my fears. And slowly, something shifted. I didn't feel young again. I didn't feel redeemed. I didn't feel ahead. I felt present. And presence, I learned, is enough to build meaning from. There are still moments when regret visits me. When I think of the years I spent rehearsing a life instead of living it. When I imagine who I might have been if I had trusted myself sooner. I don't push those thoughts away. They remind me what waiting costs. But they no longer define me. Because here is the truth I wish someone had said out loud when I was younger, when I was careful, when I was waiting: there is no version of your life that starts later without sacrificing this one. There is no readiness that arrives without risk. And time doesn't reward patience, it responds to presence. I didn't ruin my life by waiting. But I almost missed it. If you're listening to this and telling yourself that you'll begin once you feel ready, once things settle, once you become more confident, I need you to understand something clearly: waiting feels safe. Until it becomes your whole life. You don't need certainty to start. You don't need permission to choose. You don't need to make the perfect decision. You only need to stop postponing yourself. I waited for my real life to begin. What I finally learned is this: it was never waiting for me.